Oh boy, we're getting closer and closer to June, and that means some big game releases, but also some major gaming events, and possibly none bigger than E3. A ton of big publishers are gonna be there, and as always, typical E3 MO, there's gotta be some leaks, there's gotta be some things being rumored prior to the event. We all remember that infamous leak with Walmart Canada a few years ago, but this time it looks like a leak might be coming in regards to Square. Now, Nick of the co-host of the Xbox Era podcast did note the leak ship is a Square, and apparently the leak is pretty major in regards that it's a lot of stuff. Alex Donaldson also tweeted out, there's one major publisher where I don't know how they've done it, but probably the most comprehensive big event leak I've seen in years is currently happening behind the scenes. Not just info, assets, footage, madness, just a countdown until someone releases this stuff now. Now, Alex Donaldson didn't note which publisher it was, so take that for what you will, but if you do connect the dots, maybe that is in regards to Square Enix. Obviously, it has also been rumored that Square Enix is apparently ready to reveal another Final Fantasy title, and this new PlayStation 5 Final Fantasy spin-off that'll be revealed next month is confirmed by Navtra. She noted that the game is to be Souls-inspired. Signs are also pointing to Team Ninja, but Navtra has not commented on that, although not debunking it either. So, a lot of interesting moving parts. It seems like Square Enix is really putting all of its eggs into the Final Fantasy basket, and I am all for that. We all know what brought Square Enix to the dance. We all know why Square Enix is as popular as they are. I'm sorry, it's not Outriders, it's not The Quiet Man, it's not Marvel's Avengers. Square Enix lives and dies by their Japanese properties, at least a big part of them. Final Fantasy XIV, Endwalker's gonna be huge. Final Fantasy 16 is going to be huge. Remake Part 2 is going to be huge. Hell, Intergrade is going to be huge. And if they want to do another Final Fantasy game, I can understand why you don't want to go the same route of your typical JRPG and you want to take it more of an action route where it's something a little bit more Souls-inspired, but not directly like that, and still has, those Final Fantasy bells and whistles that everyone knows and loves. I think that could be very effective, especially because that Souls-inspired style gameplay, I'm not saying Souls, like just slightly Souls-inspired, I think that could really be something that attracts a different audience to Final Fantasy as well, because anyone that hears Souls-like, I feel like there's an audience of people that immediately get interested in a game like that, and then you tag on a notable IP like Final Fantasy on top of that, well, that's just gonna generate a healthy amount of buzz, and we'll see how everything ultimately plays out. It seems like Square Enix not only has this Final Fantasy title, but they might be announcing another Final Fantasy title on top of that, so we'll see how everything shakes out as far as Final Fantasy. Remake Part 2 is still in development, Intergrade is out in just a few weeks, Final Fantasy 16, who knows if that's gonna hit 2021, probably not. I'd probably point towards an early 22 release for that, but hey, if it hits 21, thumbs up from me. And then of course Endwalker is on November 23rd, so Square Enix all-inning on Final Fantasy. I mean, all you gotta do is look at the sales numbers for the Final Fantasy VII Remake and you'd be like, whoa! Okay, it turns out people do really like Final Fantasy, and if they can develop Final Fantasy in a consistent form, where it's not, a 10-year development cycle like Final Fantasy Versus 13 into Final Fantasy 15, then Final Fantasy could be a huge money generator for Square Enix, and it still is. Final Fantasy 14 is doing incredibly well. Remake Part 2, it's not like that game took an inordinate amount of time to get to the market. I mean, 4.5 years for Final Fantasy standards, I'd say that's pretty darn good. And if we're gonna get into a world where we're seeing Final Fantasy releases every year or every other year, but they're a little bit different from one another, you have all of these properties you can pick from, well, I think that's a very effective strategy to take with Final Fantasy, especially if you have a variety of different studios working on them, like a Team Ninja doing their own thing with Final Fantasy, then you got the remake team doing their thing with Final Fantasy VII Remake, you got the MMO team doing their thing with FF14, and then you got the mainline game and Final Fantasy 16 coming out as well. Those are 4 distinctly different experiences where, yes, you have the Final Fantasy label attached to all of them, but these are all different games. These are all unique experiences. And if you want to keep the thematics and some of the notable elements of Final Fantasy attached to all of them, be my guest, but they are going to be distinctly different experiences. At least that's what it's coming across to me. And not to mention, Square Enix has always been invested into Final Fantasy, but I can't recall the last time where, we've heard this much about Final Fantasy and this much going on with Final Fantasy at the same time. Nevertheless, exciting stuff developing as far as that's concerned, and again, that Final Fantasy spin-off is noted to be revealed next month during that E3 presentation, or at least some point next month. You would think E3 would be the best venue to do that, and when I say venue, you know, it's not really a venue because it's going to be an all-digital event. It's not like they're going to be at the E3 LA venue, but you guys get the idea. We'll see how everything goes with that. Okay, also want to note another thing where this is incredibly exciting. This is coming from Aesthetic Gamer, aka Dust Golem, noting, "It's pretty safe to assume most Capcom games that aren't ports, remasters, or very specifically using an engine for one reason or another will be using RE engine." Dragon's Dogma 2 100% is using the RE engine, but that's not surprising thing, I'd say. So obviously, just casually throwing out Dragon's Dogma 2 100% using the RE engine. The RE engine is fantastic. Like, I don't know if you guys played Resident Evil Village, but holy hell, did that game run smooth on next-generation platforms. I should say, I played the game mostly with ray tracing turned off. When I turned ray tracing on, there were a couple sections where I got a little bit of inconsistent frame rates and things like that. I believe the ray tracing option with RE Village was targeting 45 FPS, ray tracing off was 60 FPS at 4K, so I was mostly playing it at 60 FPS, and man, it ran like butter at 60 FPS if you turn off ray tracing, so that was really nice to see. But that engine in general is just tremendous, so if they want to apply that engine to other games, being a Dragon's Dogma 2, hey, I'm all for that. And obviously, I've been singing the praises of Dragon's Dogma for a long time now, going back to, I believe, 2012 when it initially came out with the base game, and then Dark Arisen came out the year after that, and then, you know, kind of went to the wayside for a while, got a second win with the PC release, and Capcom did a tremendous job porting that game to PC. It seemingly sold really well, and that parlayed into the release of the game on Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and that version readily goes on sale for like $9, and I constantly recommend it. If you're a fan of challenging, you know, action RPGs, Dragon's Dogma is a game I highly, highly recommend you to play, and it's a game that whenever I talk about Dragon's Dogma, it seems like the comment section is flooded with people being like, where's my Dragon's Dogma 2? And Dragon's Dogma 2 has been something that people have been wanting for a very long time. It's like one of those things that I readily hear about every few weeks, being like, where's Dragon's Dogma 2? Why hasn't Capcom gone back to Dragon's Dogma 2? But if you've really been following Capcom, it seems like they're really listening and have their finger on the pulse of what the gamers want. And hey, I don't know if that means they're gonna do what I really want in an Okami 2. Maybe Okami 2 is still a little bit of a far cry, but I think Capcom does recognize that a ton of people want a Dragon's Dogma 2, and it looks like ultimately that probably will be happening. And with the RE engine to boot using that, I think that is going to create something that not only looks great, plays great, but it's Dragon's Dogma. If they keep some of the formula of the original game, I think that's going to be a really, really great title to keep an eye on. Hopefully we hear about it soon. It seemingly is a title that they've wanted to do, at least the developers have wanted to do for a while. But that's going to wrap up this one. Again, Final Fantasy, Square Enix, a lot of moving parts as far as that's concerned as we are getting closer and closer to E3, and Dragon's Dogma 2 possibly happening. And, you know, Aesthetic Gamer, Dust Golem saying 100% using the RE engine. That's a pretty exciting note. That's going to wrap up this one. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.